everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Avon Van Hassel. I'm a self-published author, and I'm here every Wednesday to give you tips and tricks for things to try in your writing. Now, this week is week 3 of a 5-part series on character building. Last week we talked about personality, and in the first week we talked about naming. This week I'm going to talk about physical appearance. And then I'm hopefully going to take a little bit of a break to try to do a Sims thing. I don't have a lot of hope because The Sims and my computer and a combination of everything just exists to frustrate me. But I'm sure there's a way to do it. Where there's a will, there's a way, and I have a will. So I'm planning to take a break next week to do a Sims thing. And if that falls through, then I'll just do the last 2 episodes of the character building series. And hopefully stick a pin in it and do The Sims at some point. But anyway, I'm going to say this at the beginning. Be sure to subscribe and hit the little bell so that you know when the next episodes are coming out, and so that you won't miss them and you won't miss the end of the series. So with that little thing out of the way, let's dive into character appearance. So these are the 3 main components that, for a lot of people, make up sort of the surface level of your character. When you create a character, you think about things in terms of who are they, as in how do they behave, what are they good at, what do they like, also what their name is and what they look like, right? In the next 2 videos of the series, we're going to be talking about more internal things like relationships and their function in the story. But right now, we're just going to focus on appearance. Appearance is one of those things that there is a lot of debate about whether or not it's important to include at all. And I can see both sides of the argument. There's the one, I believe it's Stephen King, that says you should never describe your character physically. And I think his point is that it shouldn't matter what they look like, because a story can happen to anyone, right? But there's another school of thought that says, yeah, but not every story happens in the same way to everyone. And that brings in issues of things like gender and race and visible disability. Also, belonging to a certain group or culture can affect the way certain things happen to certain people. So also, I feel like it's not enough to allow the audience to insert themselves into a story. I feel like it is important to make a clear statement about the sort of people who are involved in this story. For instance, I do believe in this trend we have right now of sort of aggressively injecting representation in the media, and I think that's a great thing, because I don't think it's fair to expect everyone to go through all these acrobatics to see themselves in what is available to them. I think that all people should be represented in one form or another in the media, because we have all kinds of people in our society, and if we're going to have an accurate representation of our population in media, that should involve more people doing more things. The problem with this, of course, is that you get into stereotypes, and so certain types of people get sort of pigeonholed into certain storylines and certain types of characters, and I feel like it is important, if we're going to inject more representation, we need to also break those molds and show that it is possible for different kinds of people to have different stories. So this is when we get into something called straight white male syndrome. And that is the likelihood or the ease for a reader to interpret the whatever character is speaking as a straight white male. And I have seen this happen so many times, and it's not always like specifically a cisgender, heterosexual, European man. But it is, you tend to default straight, you tend to default white, you tend to default male. In the absence of other descriptors, people will assume straight white male because the majority of our stories historically here in the West have centered around straight white men. And so it's easy to sort of just default to that. And like I said, I've had this in my own stories. It's the most frustrating. Sulat is black. Sulat has always been black. Sulat, literally, from the moment I got her name, has been a black woman. Turned out, over the course of writing, that she's also bisexual. That came out accidentally and organically, but she's always been black. And there are people in my own family who I have to keep reminding them, even though I've mentioned it, I don't even know how many times, in the text, in the prose, that she is dark-skinned. She has dark brown skin. She has curly, puffy hair. She has, like, I have invented separate terms for people who come directly from the analog of the African continent. And I have a name for people whose ancestors came from there, but who were born in Vieland, etc. I have tried to make it as clear as I possibly can in a world that doesn't use the term black or African, and it's still, people just cannot, I don't know how to make it more clear. So it happens. And this is why representation is so important. So we do need to sort of break out of that mold and get comfortable with identifying and sympathizing with characters who don't necessarily look like us. And when I say us, I'm talking about cisgender, straight, white people. Because traditionally, it's the other people who are not cisgender, straight, white men who have had to see themselves and empathize with cisgender, straight, white male characters. So I feel like the time has come to shake it up a little bit, but that's my soapbox. But for you as a writer, even if you are writing straight white male characters, you do need to understand that if you're going to have diversity in your stories, this is an uphill battle that you're going to be fighting the whole time. So just be aware and settle in and try to find those descriptors that make things very clear without being a stereotype. So that's that soapbox. So I have broken down what I consider to be the most important aspects of a character's physical appearance. The first one is what I call D&D stats, which is the little boxes that you have on a Dungeons & Dragons character sheet for writing in what your character looks like. And this is, I play 3.5 because it makes the most sense to me. You're given age, gender, race, which usually is like elf, human, dwarf. It's not like races within the races. There are some, but for the most part, it's pretty broad. Height and weight, and then hair color, eye color, and skin color. That's it. So I feel like a lot of people tend to just stick to those. This person is tall, and they're fat, and they're white, and they have black hair and blue eyes. And that's all you need to know. And it's a dude. There you go. That's my character. Which is fine, because it's broad enough for people to get the sort of general idea. You know, you don't really need to know much about the shape of this person's nose unless it really affects the story. You don't need to know, like, how their weight is distributed unless it's important to the story. That sort of thing. But it does tend to get a bit uninteresting. So, there's nothing wrong with D&D stats, but there's nothing really great about it either. The next thing I want to talk about is race. Now, a lot of times in these videos, I refer to race as, like, human and non-human. The way Dungeons & Dragons describes race is sentient creatures being, you know, having a higher intelligence than animals, and who, like, can affect a story. So they have to have a certain level of intelligence to be considered a race. So they don't necessarily need to be human. And the reason why I include this is because a lot of people, especially my demographic, are writing fantasy races. So you will have things like dwarves and giants and all of them, and they will count as races. But people a bit more writing in a bit more of the real world are probably going to confine races to mean different ethnic and cultural groups within the human race. I'm going to use them both kind of interchangeably because I write in both genres, so it's more of a genre thing. So you can, especially in a fantasy setting, it's really important to delineate human versus non-human races because that does tend to affect the story, and it does tend to affect the characters because different races will view things through different cultural lenses than other races. In a modern Earth-like setting, race is important, especially if you're writing something slightly political, because different people with different cultural backgrounds have different experiences even within the same culture. Like, I mean, look around you. If this year hasn't illustrated that, I don't know what will. So race is one of those aspects of a person's identity that is often very important to them. And it is aspects of a person's identity that is often very important to society. However, there are certain instances where race is not a factor in a certain situation or a certain dynamic with other characters, at which point you might not think it's important to mention race. However, just be aware that there's a likelihood that your audience will default to white, and if that character is not white, and you don't want them to be interpreted as white, then you might want to mention it. And the pendulum swings the other way too. So if you're writing a character in a situation that is contrary to racial stereotypes, then it might be seen as a good piece of representation to make sure that character's race is noted. For instance, people of color tend to be relegated to service roles. It's getting better now, but it was like, especially in the 60s when Star Trek was a big thing, Nichelle Nichols was one of the, I don't remember if she was actually the first or if she was just one of a very few black women who was cast in a role that wasn't a maid. And I think Martin Luther King Jr. actually mentioned it, that he was really super psyched about her role because she wasn't a maid. So it is important that she is a black woman on the bridge. So that sort of thing is good, even though she doesn't have to deal with storylines related to racism and sexism in the same way that other black characters at the time were having to deal with those storylines. So it's up to you, but just be aware that people will default to white if you don't mention race. Second thing is gender. This one is a little bit easier for people to sort of figure out where you're going because of pronouns. So if you're referring to somebody as she over and over and over, or if you've given them a feminine sounding name over and over and over, people probably aren't going to assume that she is a dude. So it's a bit easier. It's really, actually, I can't think of a situation where you wouldn't mention a character's gender, just because, I guess, gender politics in terms of like how people react to the genders is so ingrained in our society that it's just, I can't think of a character right now who was not specifically given a gender. That's wild. That's a thing. I think we are moving toward a higher percentage of transgender and non-binary characters in media, which is great. And we need to keep going with that. But that's, I think, where it really kicks in as something to consider, because I think it's just second nature for people to just be like, this character is a dude, this character is a chick. You're probably wondering why I'm spending so much time on it, because obviously that's one of the first things you're going to write down, right? But there is a proliferation these days of including characters outside or within the binary. I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% clear on the correct phrases and expressions to use when talking about transgender issues. But I'm learning, and if I get it wrong, do let me know, because I'm not out here to be a bigot. I'm trying to be as accurate and correct as possible. Because it is important, and representation is important, and when people don't see themselves as part of the culture, meaning represented by the media, that's when a lot of bad things start happening. So it's important, because media is sort of a cross-section and an illustration of what life is like in a society. And that's why it's important for people to see themselves. It's not enough to enjoy the story. You have to see yourself as part of the story, as part of the culture, as part of the arts, essentially. So that's why representation is important. So if you have a non-binary character or a transgender character, feel free to lean as far into that as you want, because we're getting to a point in society where it's getting more okay to be able to write that character without worrying about too much backlash, which I think is one reason why a lot of people haven't, is because they want to, but they're worried about how that character is going to be perceived. And I think we're getting to a point in society where it's getting okay. And it's actually sort of encouraged to have more different kinds of people in your stories. So the next thing I want to talk about is not necessarily something that's always going to be considered, but it is something that should be considered where appropriate, and this is disability. Now, this is another tricky area, like race, like gender, like a lot of things, where I'm coming at this from a able-bodied perspective, but it is something that we're seeing more and more in media, and that is representation of disabled people who still have full lives and full agency and function within a story. And this is something that's important, because going back to the other things we're talking about in terms of representation, these are people who exist in society and therefore should be represented in media. So I'm not going to really bang the drum very much on this one, because I feel like I've covered representation is important in other areas, but it is something that sometimes is an outward appearance for a character, and it is sometimes something that is an aspect of their identity. This is something the characters might notice about your character, or something that your character might struggle with or be proud of. It's just another aspect of character building that plays into who they are as a character and how other characters react to them and how they can participate in the story. Either they have to overcome their disability, or something about their disability works for them in a way that able-bodied characters might not, necessarily think of, if that makes sense. People who are living with something different than other people have a different way of seeing the world, right? They have a different way of solving problems. And sometimes you need that sort of lateral thinking to get through a situation. It's not going to come up in every character, but it might come up in some characters. And there's also, you can talk about an invisible disability also that contributes to a character's identity or a way that other people respond to them. Just because it's invisible doesn't mean it's not part of character building. And the last thing I want to talk about is style. And this is personal style. This is how a character chooses to express themselves to the outside world. It could be in opposition to who they are on the inside. It could be in opposition to their society as a whole or a group that they're involved in, or it can be totally in line with all of that. So basically, this covers pretty much anything that they put on themselves that they weren't more or less born with. You know what I mean? So it's not part of their body. It's something that they chose to change about themselves. So this has to do with clothes, with accessories, something like tattoos and haircuts. And all of that, any modifications that you've made to your physical appearance, contributes to who you are as a character. So, for instance, I'm wearing the shirt that says, "Well-behaved women rarely make history." Now, that has some gender politics involved in it and some opinions. I'm not wild about the fact that it's gray, but I do like the sentiment. My Fitbit watch band has kind of an iridescent-y thingy because I like mermaids. So these are things that I've chosen to wear that express different parts of my personality, like feminism, like mermaids, but also fitness, etc. So everything you write down about your character says something about who they are, their role in society, their role in the story. So there's a lot to consider, and it's just as important as personality and name and the next two things we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. Okay? So, I hope that helped with any issues you might be having with character building. I hope it gave you some good ideas. I hope I got kind of close to the mark with some of these issues that are kind of outside of my personal sphere of understanding. And do please, if I got it wrong, do please leave a comment and let me know where I misstepped, because we're all trying to do better and be better. If you think this video will help someone else who's struggling with characters and descriptions and all of that, feel free to share. If you liked it, give me a like and a comment, and I think that about wraps it up for appearance for right now. Let me know if there's anything that I forgot in the comments, and stay tuned. Next week, I'm going to try to do The Sims, like I said. I'm going to try so hard, you guys. I'm going to try so hard. And then, after that, if it goes through, I'm going to do a video on character relationships, and then a video on character conflict. Okay? So, and then that's going to wrap it up for the character series. So, we're halfway there. Yeah, so that about does it for me. And I will see you guys next week. Bye.